You sound like a sore loser to me. Don't you appreciate the complexity of this thing?
Complexity are entering this split a little under the radar, with North America being rich with teams that have high expectations from proven units like Genji and FaZe, to those under them looking to elevate their play like Space Station version 1, and a slew of other teams like Furia who are bringing a new trio to the mix. Complexity has a little bit of everything. For a little bit of backstory, the duo of AJG and Bull saw tremendous success in their home region of South America, and this was the former True Neutral roster, and they made the international move to North America before it was cool. After scraping into last season's Fall Major with their running mate Shad, Complexity found themselves unable to produce their promising level. They didn't qualify for the winter or the spring majors, and these results made them fall short of the World Championship. And to sting even worse, it was in their backyard of Dallas, so Complexity looked for pivots. There were enticing players abound in South America, but they opted to sign breakout European sensation CRR, who was fresh off of blowing everyone's socks off at the Gamers 8 event, and he was also elevating Guild from their previous results in the RLCS. When it happened, this move felt like a slam dunk. I mean, CRR was one of the hottest rising stars, but off the pitch family concerns for CRR compounded with just the general difficulty of moving your life across the globe and the added pressure of competing with a new roster in one of the world's toughest regions, this was just too much for Complexity to overcome in the fall split we just had. Now, those are all excuses, but I think they're fair ones, especially when we've seen similar things happen to Furia, who struggled with the exact same move from South America to NA, but now these excuses are gone. Entering the winter split, Complexity are tied, ironically, with Furia, who just added budding superstar Lost, and they're also tied with Optic, who are likely to be treading water after the trade window pump fake that returned Magic Bear to their team. All three of these teams have pressure to perform, but if we're to stack them against one another, from my perspective, I think the most pressure lies on Complexity, mostly because they aren't allowed to use the same excuses that Optic and Furia have because they already used them. They've already made roster adjustments. They've already gone through the turmoil of building a new team together, so this is it. This is the roster we have. Obviously, Complexity aim to improve their results this split, so I want to talk a little bit about what they do well and maybe a couple of things that they could improve in order to make the improved results happen. Generally speaking, Complexity play a fairly conservative style, being one of NA and EU's most midfield-heavy teams. They're only behind Oxygen and BDS in that respect. Now, unlike those two teams, Complexity spends substantially less time in the offensive third, where BDS and Oxygen are in the top 5 in that statistic. Complexity are an above-average defense, especially when you look at the fact that they're boasting relatively low opponent shooting numbers. They're only allowing about 7.5 shots, and this puts them right alongside some elite units like Carmine Corps and G2. The biggest differentiator between Complexity and Carmine Corps and G2 is that those two teams are allowing low shots per game because they're generating just overwhelming pressure, right? Opposing defenses are stuck in their own half, therefore they just can't generate a lot of shots because they just don't have the chances to. Complexity don't have the same kind of overwhelming offensive presence that those two rosters have. So for a little more comparison, because those are two teams we're pretty familiar with, G2 are taking almost 9 shots per 5 minute, and Carmine Corps are at just about 8.5. Now, Complexity, we find them more in the middle of the pack, and they're at about 7.5 shots per 5. Now, I think it's important to say that these numbers are totally fine. In fact, they're above average in a lot of respects. They're above major teams, Moist and Quadrant, but those aren't really two teams that we look at as like overwhelming offenses. And also, these numbers for Complexity fall short of every other major attending team besides these two from North America and Europe. Now, Complexity have gone ahead and fixed what I thought was a pretty glaring issue of theirs when I last analyzed this team, and that was their truly horrendous shooting percentages. They found themselves near the bottom, and they were also pretty low to middle of the pack when it came to amount of shots. So when you combine those two things, you're not taking a lot of shots and you're converting even less. That's basically a death sentence if you're trying to be one of the best teams. But CRR's creativity, Rays Bull's continued brilliance, and AJG's uptick in offensive proficiency have helped them plug a lot of these holes. And the result of plugging these proverbial holes has been Complexity are a top 5 team when we're talking about shooting percentage, and they're scoring above 2 goals per game, sandwiched in between elite offensive teams like Furia and Team Liquid. Now, those are all things that Complexity are doing super well at. They're continuing to build and improve upon. Now, let's talk about a funky little thing that they might be able to at least consider if they're looking to gain another competitive edge against the pack. Where Complexity differ from the pack is in boost. So we have 38 teams that we're analyzing from North America and Europe that meet the criteria for what we're talking about here, and Complexity rank 36th out of 38 teams in boost per minute. So this makes sense. We talked about Complexity having this conservative play style. This team attribute is further borne out when we're looking at their overfill numbers, and overfill, brief overview, is it's basically indicative of the amount of boost above a full 100 tank that Complexity are collecting and stealing. So in both stolen and collected overfill, Complexity rank in the top 3 of the 38 teams that we're measuring. What does that mean? That might be a little confusing. It means Complexity often find themselves within the flow of an offense that has the projected ability to go faster if they'd like to, but they just opt to not go faster. When we compare that to some teams who are looking to speed things up, like Liquid and G2, Complexity are just playing at their own pace. And in many respects, Complexity is at or above team averages in a lot of stats, including boost, which is a welcome sign. Now, when talking about the players on this roster, something I really like about Complexity is they have a fairly clear pecking order, with CRR being the primary scoring option. He's taking a team high 3.15 shots per game. This is yielding a team high 0.79 goals per game. A shade behind him is Rays Bull. And then we see a pretty significant drop off to AGG in both regards. This is where we enter this kind of strange territory that I still honestly don't really know where I fall on this. And that's kind of this argument of, do you look to upgrade your third, and in this case that's AJG, who is the bottom of your team in every core stat, or is that actually what you want? And what I mean by that is we're getting a look at some kind of experimentation with some high caliber teams like Oxygen, for example, who opted to remove who I think is honestly an ideal role player with Oli and replace him with the superstar Rise. Now, in theory, you want as much talent as possible, right? I mean, you want to just overload your team with as much talent as you can. That's how you win games. In many cases, this is exactly what you want. This works. This is how BDS just won the World Championship, for example. But to zig when there's some zagging, perhaps you actually want to have a third who doesn't really want or expect the ball and is okay to play off of your 2 stars. This is the position that AJG finds himself in currently, but with the pressure heavy on this roster, I have this team circled as a potential mover at the trade window. I mean, everyone is invested heavily into the success of this team. These players have been shipped from various countries. They expect to win, but they are yet to do so consistently. This split is going to show us what Complexity are made of, and if they can rise to the occasion under the pressure. If they look great, it will be due in part to the clear advances Complexity have made on the pitch statistically, and if they don't, AJG might be on the chopping block as a scapegoat, whether he deserves it or not. We're going to start to see where this storyline is going to develop this weekend. Complexity have a group against KOI, Dignitas, and Gen G, and Complexity should be drooling over this group. I mean, they have KOI and Dignitas. Those are 2 teams that they seemingly should beat, right? But, of course, time will tell How far do you have Complexity making it in this tournament, and do you think they're going to be a top 5 team who can attend the major at the end of this split? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks so much for taking the time to check out this video. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and until next time, take it easy.